This is IGN. After a lengthy 14-year hiatus, the Final Destination franchise is finally coming back to theaters with a sixth installment, Final Destination Bloodlines. The basic formula for this series has always involved someone having had a premonition that leads a group of people to narrowly avoid dying in a disaster, except by doing so, they're defying the will of death itself, who's none too happy as a result and retaliates by then killing each one of these survivors off, one by one, in particularly elaborate, brutal, and often darkly funny ways. So, as we get ready for Bloodlines, let's look back at the first 5 films and determine which of these crazy demises stand out the most. First though, some quick ground rules. We've decided that the mass casualty premonitions that begin each movie, and in the third and fourth films even happen again in the third act, don't count for our purposes here. Look, don't get us wrong, they're awesome in general and feature spectacular deaths, and wow, that car pileup that begins the second movie absolutely has us all forever fearing a Final Destination incident while driving. But still, in the context of this series, they're not real deaths, since most of the characters we see meet their end in these premonitions will go on to actually die in totally different ways, after first surviving whatever disaster is foretold in these sequences. But don't worry, there's all kinds of gnarly deaths to still sort through. Here's our look at the 6 best Final Destination deaths so far. We begin with number 6, from 2003's Final Destination 2, Airbag Meets Pipe, where we sometimes see people narrowly avoid several different ways they could die before something else finally gets them. Final Destination 2 had a clever swerve on that play out with businesswoman Kat when her tire blows out, causing her to crash and sending a decidedly sharpened pipe tearing into her car and going right through her seat's headrest, except it just misses her. However, when rescue workers attempt to free her, they accidentally activate her car's airbag, shoving Kat's head back violently. And that's when the force of her being lurched back so quickly causes that very same pipe to stab her through the head. This one stands out for how sudden it is, and also how technically, the actual moment of death is off-camera, obstructed by the airbag, while still using a lethal instrument that was very much set up already. This time, our expectations were that Kat had managed to avoid that particular method of elimination, and something else would finish her off, but it seems like death really wanted to use that pipe to get her. Our number 5 Final Destination death surprisingly comes from Final Destination 5 in 2011, Seeing All. Getting LASIK surgery can be an inherently nerve-wracking experience, so of course Final Destination had to make sure it went as terribly as possible, and okay, maybe beyond possible in the 5th film. This is one of the most notable deaths in terms of escalation, as so many awful things happen to Olivia in literally the final minute of her life. First, the LASIK machine malfunctions, horrifically cutting into not only her eye but her skin. Then, when she actually manages to escape that, she slips and falls, crashing through a window and hurtling several stories down, smashing into a car. That fall is what kills her, except death, ever the impish prankster, then has one of her eyes fully pop out from the impact and roll into the street, and then it gets run over by a passing car. Ugh. In at number 4 and from 2006's Final Destination 3, Tanning Bed Flambe. Most of the time, even folks who were sitting next to each other during a disaster premonition in these movies still die separately, but death made an exception for besties Ashley and Ashlyn in Final Destination 3, who die as they lived, doing everything together. At least they got a nice little sing-along right before things went horribly wrong. This death is actually one of the more prolonged and painful ones in the series, as these 2 poor girls find themselves trapped in rapidly overheating tanning beds, causing their skin to burn while glass shatters in their face, before they become engulfed in flames. It's a memorable sequence to be sure, and one also given a dark and funny punchline with the hard cut from their twin flaming tanning beds to their twin coffins. Our list of the 6 best Final Destination deaths continues with number 3. From the original Final Destination in 2000, it's the bus hit. There's absolutely no way we can skip this death from the first movie, both because of how fun and memorable it is in its own right, thanks to the sheer surprise of it at the time, but also for how iconic it's become in the series. Terry declares how she's gonna move on from the plane crash she and the others survived, only to find out Death has other plans when she steps off a curb and gets pulverized out of nowhere by a passing bus. Even as the series would move on into far more elaborate and gory set pieces in the sequels, Terry's death stands out as the first time a Final Destination audience found themselves laughing and cheering for one of the deaths. Yeah, we're all sickos. Anyway, so much so that the filmmakers needed to re-edit the aftermath of the moment to account for how well it went over in test screenings, since people were otherwise missing hearing the dialogue in the next scene. This quickly became such a signature death for the series that it is continually referenced, including providing the conclusion to the fourth movie's greatest hits opening credits, as well as the same movie outright repeating this death, albeit with a line of dialogue right before to let the audience know the filmmakers were well aware they were repeating themselves. Even 25 years later, the trailer for Final Destination Bloodlines ends with a callback to this moment. Terry, you will never be forgotten. Only 2 deaths left, and in at number 2, glass pane flattening from Final Destination 2. So the Final Destination filmmakers quickly realized they could have a lot of fun by presenting a ton of ways someone could die and then use that as a fake out for what was going to actually occur. And few sequences do that better or provide a more amazing crescendo than what happens to young Tim in Final Destination 2, whose trip to the dentist is filled with lethal possibilities. It starts with pigeons that apparently violently slam into the dentist's window on a regular basis. That should be a hard pass for any potential patient. Tim somehow makes it out of this death trap, even after a near suffocation, only to instantly pull a "I see pigeons, I run it pigeons" move outside, which then results in a giant dangling pane of glass that was established earlier, just absolutely obliterating the kid. This death is pure Looney Tunes in a gloriously bloody Final Destination way. I mean, come on, Tim gets flattened like he's Wile E. Coyote, except unfortunately he's not getting up from this one, giving both death itself and those pigeons an absolute victory the Roadrunner can't claim. Man, and finally in at number 1, the human pretzel from Final Destination 5. This sequence in Final Destination 5 featuring gymnast Candace is another where a lot of the initial excitement comes from first establishing the many ways she could meet her demise. A huge air conditioning unit threatening to collapse, a fallen screw on the balance beam ready to be stepped on, an exposed wire with water dripping onto it, another loose screw on the uneven bars. I mean, seriously, this place really needs to tighten their screws better. However, what's so interesting about the payoff here is that ultimately, Candace's death could be described in the simplest terms as taking a bad fall, which doesn't sound very notable for a Final Destination death, but whoa, what a fall! Just as she's doing her routine on the uneven bars, a fellow gymnast steps on that errant screw, knocks over a bowl of that gymnast chalk dust stuff. Sorry guys, we're not generally gymnasts here at IGN. And blinds Candace just as she spins into the air, and bam! One instantly snapped spine later, and Candace has provided one of the wildest visuals in the history of Final Destination deaths, which is saying something. Oh, and there it is, maybe our most sadistic IGN countdown yet. The 6 best deaths from the Final Destination franchise. The 6th installment is now in theaters. My name is Tony Jackson, and if you want more news on your favorite games and entertainment topics, make sure to visit us at IGN.com. You can also download our free app on your phone or console, and subscribe to our weekly podcast through the podcast service of your choice.
Spoken Layer.